So, good morning, and thank you very much for joining today's CMCC talk, focus on strategies and innovative financing for cultural landscapes. My name is Veronica Casartelli. I'm a senior associate scientist at CMCC. And before giving the floor to our speaker, Dana Salpina, I will very briefly introduce the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. So CMCC is a leading research center focused on understanding the interaction between climate change and society. Our network is really broad. You can see in the slide some of our partners and spans from international organizations, but also public authorities, private companies, and civil society organizations. We are a non-profit foundation, and this is our mission. We move from models to solutions. So we focus on advancing climate research through multidisciplinary analysis, and we combine climate modeling, impact assessment, and environmental economics with the final aim to support science-driven adaptation and mitigation actions. I will provide you with a brief overview of our research infrastructure. So we count on transversal and multidisciplinary competencies that combine climate modeling with the climate change impact modeling and environmental economics. We have a number of research divisions grouped into three main research institutes: the Institute for Earth System Predictions, the Institute for Climate Resilience, and the European Institute on Economics and Environment. On top of that, we have four cross-cutting strategic programs. The first one is focused on integration of the planetary biogeochemical and industrial carbon cycle, where we model carbon cycles to support the transition to a low-emission economy. Another one is focused on global costs. So global cost as the new frontier. Here we develop digital twins to explore coastal phenomena at the intersection of physical and economic processes. A third program is focused on socio-economic outcomes in a changing climate. So here we develop integrated models to support adaptation within policy and investment timeframes. And the last program is focused on integrating AI and machine learning in the modeling chain. We have three centers. The High Performance Computing Center, which is the most powerful computational facility in Italy and among the most advanced in Europe, fully dedicated to climate change research. A second center is focused on innovation, digital innovation. So Advanced Digital Innovation Center, which is a hub where we bridge cutting-edge technologies with the critical research needs of the future. And the third center is focused on education, training, and capacity building, knowledge transfer on climate change. Some housekeeping rules before giving the floor to Dana Salpina. So your audio and video intervene, ask questions, or add your comments using the Q&A section. After Dana's speech, I will monitor the Q&A section and I will pass her all your comments and questions. I will stop sharing my screen and without any further ado, I will start presenting our speaker. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dana Salpina from Kazakhstan. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change and specifically within the Risk Assessment and Adaptation Strategies Division. She's an expert in climate change adaptation, resilience, and the protection of cultural heritage. Her work explores how our communities, institutions, and landscapes can adapt to increasing climate and disaster risks while preserving their cultural and environmental value. She's a key contributor of Rescue Me and Horizon Europe projects, where she has worked on innovative resilience financing and the development of strategies to strengthen the resilience of cultural heritage and cultural landscapes. So her research combines policy analysis, stakeholder engagement, and practical solutions to support climate adaptation across Europe. So I'm delighted to welcome Dana today and look forward to hearing her perspectives. So Dana, the floor is yours.
Thank you a lot, Veronica. Let me share my presentation. So thanks again for this nice introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this talk, which is focused on strategies and innovative financing for cultural landscapes. This is a brief outline of today's presentation. So I will start by speaking about the changing climate risk landscape and what it means for cultural heritage and landscape. Then I will focus on key gaps and challenges currently existing in the field of both research and policy focused on the heritage and climate nexus. Then I will briefly introduce you to the research that we have done regarding the financing the resilience of cultural landscape. And finally, I will conclude you by presenting a sort of overview of the white paper of the Green Cultural Heritage Cluster, where CMCC also takes part. So, as you know, climate change modifies temperature regimes, hydrological cycles, extreme event frequency, sea level dynamics, soil moisture patterns, and just to cite few of them. And these changes doesn't occur in isolation. They come together with a non-climatic risk drivers such as urbanization, land use change, demographic pressure, tourism, and infrastructure expansion, which bring us to so-called compound and cascading risks, which for cultural heritage translates into loss of intangible cultural heritage, for example, traditional agricultural knowledge systems, accelerated material degradation. This is particularly important in the case of built monuments, archaeological artifacts, and also greater vulnerability to coastal and river flooding in the case of coastal cultural landscape, for example, as well as increased wildfire risk in rural or natural landscapes. Overall, within the European strategic framework, there is a recognition on the importance to consider both climatic and non-climatic risk drivers, which can be seen also in the documents such as First European Risk Assessment Report, UCRA, which was published a few years ago, and even more so in the next upcoming UCRA report, which will focus even more on the systemic interaction and also emerging threats related to geopolitical situation. But this also was one of the main focus of the EU preparedness strategy published last year, where the focus was on civil military cooperation and also hybrid threats. So despite this advancement in the European strategies and international strategic framework, there are still many gaps and challenges which we still need to face. I will just maybe cite few of them. So first of all, many heritage sites still lack multi-hazard mapping, future-oriented exposure analysis, and standardized vulnerability matrices, which mostly focus on the physical dimension of heritage, but not socio-cultural vulnerability. And also there is an important gap in terms of lack of data on losses to cultural heritage. There is also an issue of scale mismatch. So as we know, climate models operate often at the regional scale, while cultural heritage interventions, or even in the case of cultural landscape, this occurs more at the side scale, and bridging these scales is technically demanding. Then there is so-called policy positioning gap. Many international framework on disaster risk reduction, like for example, Sendai framework or IPCC, increasingly recognizes the importance of protecting cultural heritage, but still it's somehow the concept of cultural heritage and cultural landscape still remain conceptually marginal in this research and both frameworks. Because, for example, it is often seen as a sort of cultural asset to be protected, conserved, or as a land use categories, for example, in the case of agricultural landscape. This also relates to the lack of funding and financing opportunities. As we know, there is a sort of mismatch between short-term financing opportunities and long-term needs of cultural landscape, long-term risks as well. So in this next slides, I would like to focus a bit on this final issue. So as we know, often climate change adaptation and mitigation, not only for cultural heritage, but in general, exceeds available public funding. And in this context, there is an increasing recognition of the important role played by financing and business strategies. But there is a fragmented knowledge on the resilience financing in cultural heritage and landscape, and existing studies and projects also mostly focus, for example, on conventional heritage categories. For example, museum collections, archaeological artifacts, built monuments. But cultural landscape are dynamic socio-ecological systems, and therefore their resilience require the use of more holistic approach that addresses not only their physical dimension, but also the continuity of the underlying productive activities, for example, agriculture, forestry, fishery, which can be also considered as a sort of sectors, as an entry point for investment into cultural landscapes. So within this study, we had a twofold objective. On the one hand, we wanted to consolidate the fragmented knowledge on cultural landscape financing. And on the other hand, we had a task to feed the Rescue Me meta repository of solutions, which is intended as a sort of integrated searchable database of solutions. So as a first step, we have developed a template to collect in a more systematic and homogeneous way all of the solutions. This template was elaborated together with our colleagues from the University of Bologna and Conexiones Improbables. As you see, it contains many strings such as total investment collected helps to this measure. Capitals involve social human capital, financial capital, key elements, hazards, etc. So as a second step, we've conducted systemic literature review, first based on Scopus database and focusing on peer-reviewed articles. And based on this, let's say, step, we have overall analyzed and selected as a final step 40 peer-reviewed articles. And as a second step, we also did a selection of related solutions and measures on the past projects and also available databases such as Click, Panorama, for Heritage, Climate Adapt. And we used the Prisma approach in that in order to make the process as more transparent and reliable as possible. So finally, we have selected 109 measures related to financing, business, and economic solutions for cultural heritage and landscape, or that can be those that can be transferred to cultural landscapes. And you see here they are a bit spread across the world, but mainly concentrated in Europe. And you can see on the map that Italy can be somehow considered as an innovation hotspot of financing solutions. So then, based on qualitative comparative analysis, we grouped those solutions into 12 broader categories that you see on this slide. Mainly, those are financing solutions and quite few focused on business strategies. As you see, there is a prevalence on economic policy instrument, impact funding, hybrid funding, and PPP, public-private partnership. Here in the next slide, I would like to present a few examples of those strategies. Due to time constraint, I can't present, unfortunately, all of them, but just few to, in a way that you have an idea what you will find in those meta repository and can be maybe useful in your research, in your work as well. So first example is the economic policy instrument, which includes both incentives, for example, subsidies or payments, and also disincentive, for example, environmental taxes, which are provided or by public or private sector to encourage specific behaviors or support activities related to the protection of cultural heritage and landscape, for example. Here, the example of eco taxes in the Balearic Island, so disincentive, sorry. Here, the eco taxes were introduced to cope with coastal overcrowding and over-tourism. This solution was used as a tool to internalize environmental costs and promote sustainable practices. So a total of almost 300 projects were funded in a 2 years period, each addressing different issues from the environmental preservation to sustainable tourism, promotion of sustainable tourism practices, and also cultural heritage preservation. However, there are several implementation conditions to this kind of solution. First of all, need of structured regulatory framework and governmental support, as well as the involvement of stakeholders and transparency on how the money collected from the taxes are actually spent, whether to cultural heritage projects or others. Another example of also economic policy instrument, but in this case it is incentive. It is payment for environmental services, so-called PES scheme, which was implemented in coffee cultural landscape of Colombia to cope environmental degradation, soil erosion, intensification of agricultural production. So this market-based approach was introduced. It was led and also managed by an international NGO, I think a German one, if I'm not mistaken. Here, in this case, financial rewards were provided for adopting sustainable farming practices that protect the region's biodiversity and watershed. So the main impact of this solution was not only that investment came to the territory, to the cultural landscape, but also the increase of coffee producers' technical efficiency. Because this initiative was accompanied by some training courses to the farmers, as well as socioeconomic factors. So there are also some implementation conditions. First of all, there is a need of intermediary capable of managing this kind of scheme. In this case, was NGO. And it also requires a dedicated and blended incentive fund combining different sources of finance. For example, in Europe, this could be funding coming from the Common Agricultural Policy or Rural Development Program. Another example that I would like to showcase you is a strategy, public-private partnership. This strategy is based on a long-term agreement between two or more public and private entities for providing public assets and services. So the forms of PPP can vary based on individual countries' regulations. For example, PPP, when applied to cultural heritage and landscape, include concession and sponsorship contract, trust funds, and the 4Ps, which involves participation of civil community in the management of a specific heritage site, or even during the planning of the intervention. So here, the example of Royal Villa in Monza. In this case, a concession contract was built where the tenant, like private entity, has to manage and restore the building, the villa, and can actually manage it for 20 years after the restoration, and then give it back in a good condition to the public use. So the solution can contribute somehow to cultural production, facilitated knowledge sharing, and foster the creation of partnership between public and private. Among the implementation condition is, of course, the balance between private and collective interests, because since it is used for 20 years, it is a lot of time by a private entity. There is also a need of a specific agreement between two entities, and existence of structured regulatory framework. For example, in this case, there is Italian public work law, which regulates public-private partnerships, and also cooperation between the concessionaire and the consortium. Another example that I like as well are the crowdfunding and community financing. This strategy focused on soliciting a small contribution from multiple people. So the main distinction between crowdfunding and community financing is that, for example, in community financing, it is mainly directed to a specific group of people, farmers, local residents, etc., etc. So here's an example of Adopta Tiras initiative in the Brenta Valley, which has been facing after already the Second World War, massive abandonment of terraces, landslides, floods. To cope with that, the initiative was financially sustained by two types of membership. So they proposed ordinary membership to those people who actually want to manage agricultural terraces. And the second one, supporters membership, to those, for example, who lives abroad and just want to support the initiative without managing actually the land. The main impact of this initiative was that the project successfully revitalized over 120 terraces, promoted polycultural practices, and also enhanced the biodiversity in the area. Among the implementation conditions here is a high public awareness on risk in the territory, which helped to actually involve many people in this activity, in this campaign, and also the existence of specific association dedicated to this activity, which was also a crucial link between landowners unable to manage their properties and local farmers, residents. So basically, the meta repository of solution was not the final step of the process. After that, we have established a co-creation process, which was composed of several on-site workshop, which served as a sort of operational space between the local stakeholders. Like on this photo, you see one of the workshop in the Cinque Terre cultural landscape, where people from the municipal administration, regional administration, and national park authorities have been involved in order to somehow integrate the local knowledge on possible opportunities and measures for the territory into a more holistic vision for the cultural landscape. And based on that, we have also conducted online co-creation workshops specifically with the managers of the area to identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for implementing a specific measure from the meta repository. So just as an example, for example, in Cinque Terre cultural landscape, one of the main issues that have emerged during the on-site workshop was the fact that was the need to communicate the cultural landscapes through its local agricultural quality products in order to tackle also the increase of low value food offers present currently in the territory. For example, through storytelling campaigns, collective branding, vineyard experience routes, and so on. So after the online workshop that we conducted with my managers of the landscape, it was we have identified that one of the opportunities is the partnership with the local farmers and regional companies like Consorzio di Tutela of the local Cinque Terre wine. So we have proposed a couple of funding mechanisms for this kind of activities. One of them you see on the slide is public funds. Resources to these funds are coming from the Rural Development Program. It is specifically dedicated for the promotional campaigns related to the quality agricultural products with a geographic denomination of origin. So, of course, this is one of the, let's say, spot-on activities, but we need to move beyond this kind of pilot-oriented activities, isolated interventions and solutions to a more broader strategic approach, let's say, to cultural landscapes. So in this framework, I would like to present a very brief overview of the white paper that we have developed in Green Cultural Heritage Cluster. One of the main aspects of this paper are the need to advance data standardization and interoperability, which can be done also through the adoption of common fair data standards across EU-funded projects, but not only, and use a centralized repository already present currently. Another aspect that is mentioned here in the white paper is the importance of institutionalizing societal engagement and co-creation, because climate change adaptation is not only about science or technical solutions, but it's also about society, people who live there. So there is a need to incorporate more of this living lab co-creation practices with this project focused on cultural heritage. Another aspect mentioned here is the need of accelerated technology access and capacity building, because many practitioners still lack access and also expertise in using advanced tools such as AI-driven analysis, multi-scale modeling, and so on. Another aspect is in the need of embedding cultural heritage into sectoral policy instruments, as well as ensuring long-term sustainability and continuity of these activities, which requires more blended funding models and stronger institutional support and post-project maintenance and continuity mechanisms to make it in a way that the project, EU-funded project, are actually followed up even after the lifetime. So many research and innovation projects are already developing, advancing in this sense. They're developing decision support system, multi-hazard assessment tools, living lab methods, and many more. However, we need to a bit move from what is innovation to more integrated approach and continue the strategic dialogue among the stakeholders involved in this process. So just a couple of slides to introduce some of the activities that we are currently doing within our research team related to cultural heritage. For example, the main results from the Rescue Me project on the results from regarding the financing and economic business solutions have been also integrated in policy recommendation and proposed amendment to the general provision of the Italian code for cultural heritage and landscape code, which was organized within the Next Gen Heritage Working Group. Also, there are some other new horizons for the development of cultural heritage topic within our division. We last year have participated to the NATO full-scale exercise, where for the first time research teams have been involved together with 1,000 civil and military for emergency responders, where we exactly conducted a field survey and also interviews with a focus on civil-military cooperation, with a focus also on cultural heritage aspect. And also we are developing other projects related to, for example, nature-based project proposals, of course, related to the nature-based solutions for cultural heritage. And just to take this opportunity, I would like to also show you an opportunity to participate in an upcoming conference of the Permanent European Conference for the Study of the Rural Landscape that will take place in September in Belgium, where we are organizing a specific session focused on this topic that we have discussed today, but not only. So you are more than welcome to submit your abstract, if any, because they are currently finalizing the program, and the abstract will be still accepted in the next few days. So, and here some of the reference on which I based my today's presentation, and of course, any questions are more than welcome. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dana. It was a really rich presentation. I will immediately start with the first question in the Q&A section. So this is related to the work done under the Rescue Me project and specifically related to the literature review. So which are the criteria used for the literature review of the financing strategies?
You mean for the collection of the of the financing strategies for the meta repository?
Exactly.
Yes, for this specific aspect, one of the main criteria was that this solution was already implemented in a concrete case. So whether it is related to cultural heritage, but not only, we also consider those solutions that could be potentially transferable in the case of cultural heritage. For example, the PES payment for environmental services that I have just presented you in the coffee cultural landscape.
Thank you, Dana. We have just received another question from Marina Matera. Have you found a current specific focus on the stress on territories carrying a capacity?
If you mean within the let's say literature review that we have conducted, not exactly, because this was not a focus of the review, let's say. Yes. But in general, for sure, there is more and more attention on this aspect as well.
Thank you so much. I also have a question, if I may. So, following up on your introduction, explaining the increasing complex risk and policy landscape, and maybe also linking to your picture with the military guy with the blue shield on his shoulder. So, the European External Action Service has just published the 2025 report on the implementation of the EU concept on cultural heritage in conflicts and crises. And I noticed that the report begins with the statement that cultural heritage is a powerful force for peace. What is your opinion on this statement?
Thank you so much for this question. No, I think I find this statement very relevant, particularly in the current geopolitical context, and because traditionally cultural heritage is seen from the, let's say, conservationist, preservation perspective. So protect heritage is freeze monuments or historic building because of its cultural value, let's say. But this report, I think it also brings a bit, I didn't read it all, but from what I've seen from the news on this report, is that it highlights somehow like a broader understanding of cultural heritage, not only as an asset, cultural asset to be protected, but also sort of strategic asset that can contribute to resilience and of the local communities, because in the places where societies are affected by specific or military conflict or the crisis, the shared reference points, cultural heritage is a sort of shared reference point for these communities, and when their history and identity are respected and protected, this can somehow, I think, strengthen social cohesion and also somehow support recovery process after that. And also what this report, I think, have highlighted importantly, is not that cultural heritage can be used as a peace building instrument right away automatically, but also vice versa. It can also become a source of division between the communities because it embodies a sort of identity, memory, sense of belonging of people. So in this case, it can be also a tool for deliberate attack to the specific place that we have seen like in few days ago on the example of Saint Sophia Church and Monastery in Kiev, which was also UNESCO World Heritage Site and like landmark of the Kiev city, which was deliberately attacked because of that. So no, I think what resonates me the most about within this report is also the fact that heritage is not only seen like an important element of the past to be conserved, to be invested in, but also as a bridging element between the past and future. So a source of for the resilience of the communities potentially.
Thank you, Dana. And also, Marina, would like to thank you for your previous answer. And she was involved in two Erasmus Plus projects, one focusing specifically on tourism and preservation of cultural heritage. So they had several conclusions, and since then, unfortunately, it seems that they haven't been taken into consideration as much. But still, this is also an opportunity to connect with our researchers. So I invite also Marina to catch up and follow up on this discussion with you in the
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much for this for sharing this project outcomes, and for sure this is one of the way of how actually we as researchers on our way can also resolve this kind of issues through the dialogue, let's say.
Thank you, Dana. Since there are no, no, yes, then we have another question from Irene. Why should governments prioritize investment in cultural heritage despite having many competing demands? This is a good question, actually.
Well, it's a challenging question. I think I see from where it comes, cultural heritage is often perceived as a sort of sector which competes with more priority areas like housing, I don't know, public health, economic development, no? But the well-managed cultural landscape sites, for example, can also contribute to other policy domains, as we will see. Like, for example, we know that a well-managed terraced agricultural landscape, for example, actually reduce landslide risks and also somehow contribute to local food security of the local population. So I think when we invest into cultural heritage, we don't have to think that we invest only in those built heritage and for their cultural value, but it's also shall be seen as a sort of investment into future resilience of the area, of the landscapes.
Thank you,
I
Dana.
have another question, if I may. I see also Fulvio. Maybe I can make my question. So thank you very much for your great presentation. It was very, very interesting. I have a question regarding crowdfunding, which to me is very curious. So I wanted to know, according to you, how realistic do you think that, so just for large scale, not like small cultural landscape, let's say.
I don't know if it's my problem with my connection, but I've heard that if I understood you correctly, you were asking about if the crowdfunding is enough for the conservation of cultural landscape, right?
No, yes. I mean, if you think that can you hear me?
Now, yes.
Okay. So if you think that it is realistic, this financing strategy, let's say, for large scale cultural landscape.
Thank you so much, Angelica. No, for sure, crowdfunding is not like a silver bullet that can be used in all cases. So I think it must be somehow integrated with other funding instruments. So I would be cautious with presenting crowdfunding as a standalone solution, particularly for the extended cultural landscapes. But I think crowdfunding should not be evaluated only in terms of the amount of money raised to this helps to this kind of measure, but also in terms of broader social value that it can create. For example, the case that I have shown you earlier regarding the terraced landscape in the Brenta Valley. So there, it also helped somehow to raise public awareness on the risk present in the territory. So I think the good financing solution for cultural heritage and landscape in general should be something that balance different types of strategies, both public, private, crowdfunding, participation with the involving participation of local communities.
Thank you, Dana. And Francesca La Rosa asks, are we monitoring cultural heritage enough?
I think for sure we are not enough. It's unfortunately, although it is often mentioned in all strategies that I have mentioned as something important, but I feel it's like mentioned just to mention, let's say, because it is one of the elements to be considered, but not to an extent that it is needed. The same goes to the monitoring of cultural heritage. There are projects which make advancement in this sense, but they are not enough still because they focus mainly on specific selected pilots. But then if we think about scaling up of these methodologies developed for monitoring, for example, it is an issue because after the lifetime of the project, I feel that there is some struggle of scaling up these methodologies to other case studies, other cultural heritage landscapes.
And then we have a question from Fulvio regarding the point on conservation, adaptation of climate heritage and ensuring the continuity of economic activities that rely on cultural heritage, but also of community identity and sense of belonging connected to it. So based on your experience throughout projects and cluster, is there a debate around letting go cultural heritage in consideration of the rising costs and frequency and severity of hazards?
Yeah, thank you so much, Fulvio. No, I think it's not only within the project, but also during my studies, previous studies. During there was always a debate of what to preserve and what not, because resources are for sure limited, and not all heritage are as valuable as others. So there is always kind of discussion between both scientific community and also practitioners on how to understand what is worth of protecting and what is not. And this is becoming even more pressing, let's say, in the current context.
And we have a question regarding nature-based solutions. So in your opinion, is there a nature-based solution that can better preserve a cultural heritage site, especially in extreme weather events?
I don't know. Well, I've seen several nature-based solutions specifically adapted to industrial heritage sites. Those, I think, for example, in a rural area, I think in ex-industrial coal mining area in Germany, or other, there are many examples of how nature-based solutions are actually adapted to this kind of industrial heritage site. I think those are very good examples of how industrial fields can be reintegrated into urban tissue, help to this kind of solutions, but which should be also somehow integrated with other cultural activities and appropriate use of this abandoned places. But regarding the extreme weather events specifically, on the top of my head, I cannot now think one which would be worth of mentioning. Unfortunately, there is a lot of things we have still on our way to do.
Yeah. I don't see other question in the Q&A, so maybe I can take the opportunity to um, maybe to follow up on the roadmap that you showed before.
Yes.
Which is the most challenging step, in your opinion, of that roadmap?
I
And
think
sorry, no, it may be what would success look like in 10 years if we manage to implement all those steps?
Yes, I think all of those steps are quite challenging, particularly the financing part. For me, the success would be like not only having a lot of projects implemented and research outputs delivered, but also success would mean a sort of having a structural shift from how cultural heritage and cultural landscape are integrated into broader policy frameworks. That would be great to have a stronger interoperability of data where the output of specific research remain accessible for many years and still reusable and up to date, because one of the issue is that the tools that we have developed within different projects became very fast obsolete, let's say. Even the meta repository of solutions, there are many more solutions that are upcoming. So this is one of the aspects that I think is very important, and at least what we can, how we can contribute from the side of the researchers, not policymakers.
Thank you so much. I think there are no additional questions in the Q&A section. I invite the participants, if there are further questions, to add them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I would like to thank you very much, Dana. It was a really rich presentation, and I think this is a top priority topic for the upcoming years. So we see that in the policy documents, but also in the research arena, there is a lot of work starting or now, but I think we really need to focus on this and to operationalize what is written in the policy documents and report and whatever, and with as us as a scientist really to provide some evidence that can really help policymakers and practitioners in protecting our cultural heritage and cultural landscapes. Do you have final comments on this?
No, just to thank everyone for joining the talk, and let's catch up on this topic as well. I'm available.
Thank you. And thank you all participants to be with us today. And yeah, good. See you really soon to another CMCC talk. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.